Hello, friends. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I am a licensed clinical social worker and certified addictions counselor, and also certified Daring Way facilitator. What kind of word is that? And I practice in Chicago, Illinois. My practice is called Head Heart Therapy. Thank you for joining me today. Today's guest is a Brene Brown connection, and I've learned so much from my experience of not only the training that I went through with Brene and her team, but just the connections that I've made to other people, the connections that I've made to myself, and then the clinical understanding that I've developed as a result of all of that work. I really, truly can't thank that community enough. So just want to say that again. So this interview, FYI, was recorded a long time ago. What I'm trying to do is I end up amassing a ton of recordings, and then I find that there's a theme that emerges at some point. And so you'll hear Corey reference winter, even though when this gets released, it's going to be July and it's going to be hot, and you're going to be like, what is happening? Just so you know, I just wanted to give you that little tidbit so you're aware. So today I am interviewing Dr. Corey Martin. And Corey is a Yale-trained family physician driven to change the delivery of healthcare and improve the mental and physical health of our communities. He's the founder of the Bounce Back Project, a practicing private group physician and Bush Fellow, and lead physician in Allina's health response to clinical burnout. He lives in Buffalo, Minnesota with his wife and 3 daughters, and he says he's a recovering perfectionist and an aspiring good enoughist. And Corey, I couldn't agree with you more. I feel the same. So please enjoy my interview with Dr. Corey Martin. Hey, Corey. Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
Honestly, I'm crabby today.
Well, that's good.
I don't know.
It's good to be truthful, right?
Right? I don't know what's going on, but I worked out this morning and I was like so mad about the workout. And then like just little dumb things that are happening. I'm just like furious about it. Like it's just so dumb.
It's funny how we can get into a mood like that every once in a while, right?
I know. Especially it's like totally not my style. It's not my speed. I think a lot of it is there's been some chronic stress that I've been dealing with, and I'm just like tired of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, I get it.
But you're good?
Yeah, I'm good. It's a good day. You know, it's 10 degrees outside, and
ooh,
how could it get any better than this?
Right? So I guess let's start off by letting the listeners know how we met. So it was this past year's Daring Way Midwest Conference, right?
Yes, yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And you did a presentation. Remind me, I mean, it was basically just on the work that you're doing, which was awesome.
Yeah, so I am the head of a project called the Bounce Back Project here in Buffalo, Minnesota, and we do work around physician and healthcare provider burnout and resilience in our healthcare settings, and then we also do a ton of work of the same type of caliber and ideas within the community in our school systems and just for regular old people in our community as well.
Mm-hmm. Regular old people.
Yep.
So I probably should have asked you to start with who you are and what you do, and then we can kind of piggyback on that from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a family practice doc, and I practice in a smaller community called Buffalo, Minnesota. And so I've been doing that for many years, and over the last 5 or 6 years, really have found myself working in the field of physician and healthcare provider burnout and resilience, and really trying to help myself out of my own burnout, as well as my colleagues and friends and people who take care of my family.
Yeah. And now it's all coming back to me. I remember the story that you told about why you started this project. Do you mind sharing that here?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, go back in time about 15 years. That's when I first started practice here in our community. And I came in and I was doing full scope family medicine. So I was delivering babies. I was taking care of patients in our hospital and in the clinic, and really found myself about 5 years into practice and completely and utterly burned out. And I didn't know it at the time that I was burned out, but what I did know is I was pissed off and frustrated and angry every day when I came to work. And when I went home at the end of the day, I had nothing left to give to my family.
Yep.
And so I ended up looking for a different job and took a job, half-time job, as the director of medical affairs at our hospital, which is like the head doctor for a health system. And so it makes a lot of sense to hire the most pissed off, frustrated, burned out doc, to be the head of the docs. That makes a lot of
Right.
sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, anyway,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
unfortunately for me, nobody else wanted the job, I guess. I don't know.
Uh-huh.
And so I took that job about 7 or 8 years ago and started realizing that I was burned out and many of my colleagues were. And so we started doing some work around that and trying to figure out, how do we dig ourselves out of this hole? And how do we make things better? And I think we started doing some really cool, interesting things. And then we had a couple really tragic things happen in our community, one of which was one of my partners and colleagues, who was an obstetrician in our community, left his house one morning and told his wife, I'm going to be back in a couple hours, hugged his daughter, and got on his motorcycle and went out for a ride for his own personal well-being and clear his mind. And that was the day that he got in a motorcycle accident and was killed. And so he never came home that day. And I remember getting the call that evening from my clinic president telling me that Eric had died. And this was one of my good friends, and I just saw him the day before, and he had delivered my twins. And so this was not somebody insignificant in my life or our community. And I think it was one of those moments where it was just a punch in the gut of like, holy crap, like this could happen to any one of us at any time, right? When we leave the parking lot today and go home, it could happen. And so are we living our life the way we should? Do we feel like if today was our last day that we lived it well? And to be honest with you, the answer was hell no. Like, no, we're not. Like, this is ridiculous. We're taking work with us home for 2 extra hours every night or sticking around here doing that. We're the people that we all see when we go out to dinner and sit around a table somewhere like an Applebee's, and all 4 people in the family are on their phone not talking to each other, right? Or we're at home trying to play with our kids, and we've got our phone out trying to follow up on texts and emails and keep up on this, that, and the other. And so it became very obvious to us that we all were thinking we needed to change. And so I would tell you we did, and we did for a short period of time. It's just like, what will happen to me? I'll be like Nostradamus here and predict what's going to happen in January. So I'm going to say something like, I'm pretty sure this year is going to be the year I lose this 40 pounds I need to lose, right? And I'm going to go to the gym. This is going to be the year, even though I've done the same thing for the past 15. This has got to be the year, right? And I go and I do pretty well for the first week. And then if I were true to myself, I'd put something on my calendar on about March 1st that would say something like, hey, dummy, don't forget to cancel your gym membership because you haven't gone for a month, right?
Right.
And so we did okay for a while, and then we fell back into our old ways. And then we had a second tragedy hit us about 90 days after our first, and that was when one of our other physician colleagues and friends, who is a pediatrician in our community, committed suicide by hanging himself in our hospital chapel.
Ugh.
Yeah, I remember that night getting the call from my hospital president, my boss, asking me to hurry up and get in there because of what had happened. And I was the first senior leader to walk in that hospital that night, and I remember the look on people's faces of just complete and utter devastation.
Yeah.
Of holy cow, what the hell just happened to here, and how are we going to get through this? And then, because I think sometimes I need a big hammer to hit me over the head.
Right? It would be too easy if it were just a tiny hammer.
Right, like those 2 things should be enough, right? For us to figure out how to do this. But then the next day there was a third, and that was when I walked over to our hospital to do some clinical work. And one of the things I still do clinically is I do colonoscopies. So I was walking over to do that, and I always joke with people that I still do that because when I became an administrator, I got really good at dealing with assholes. And so that, so that's the part of my clinical, right, that's the part of my clinical thing that I should do too, right?
Right.
And so I walked over there, and as I got on the floor, the medical secretary looks at me, and she goes, oh, Corey, I'm so glad you're here today. Yesterday, when I had heard that a doc had killed himself in the hospital chapel, I really thought I was going to hear that it was you. I'll tell you, I've told that story a million times, and it gets me every time.
Yeah, that's a smack in the face.
Yeah, there's been nothing that's taken me to my knees like that comment. And, unfortunately, that's all too real, that we work around people every day, and it's the culture, at least in healthcare and in many other professions, that wouldn't surprise me if they would take their life. And that's kind of bullshit, right?
Right?
Like,
total bullshit.
Why are we okay with that? Like, that is complete bullshit. That's what started me on the journey of the Daring Way and Brené's work and all that stuff. So, yeah.
I've actually gotten in some good conversations on the podcast about healthcare and how doctors are trained. And I wish I could remember, I was listening to On Being with Krista Tippett recently, and she had a physician on there. And the woman, she teaches at some university in New York. I cannot remember, but she was saying that she teaches a course on wellness for the physician. And she's like, 30 years ago, there's no way anybody would have put that in their curriculum. And still, this is like the only class in the country that's being offered. And I do tend to work actually with a lot of impaired physicians who have addiction issues, and just the stories that they tell me about how impossibly grueling it is. I don't see how that's a way to train the people who are supposed to help other people be healthy.
Right. It is a total indoctrination, that's for sure. And it's so many of the bad things that we are probably taught in our society along the way is taken and really beaten into you more. The perfectionism, the shame of you're supposed to be perfect, and if you make a mistake, you're a horrible human being. And don't ever talk about your feelings. And if you do, you can't share them with anybody at work. And so you tend to bottle all this stuff up, and it builds up like a big abscess. And at some point, it's got to explode.
Right. Well, I always think about, too, the reasons that people might want to become a doctor can end up getting skewed along the way because you don't have time for patient care. If you're adhering, I had one client who was a surgical resident, and they remarked on how they always got in trouble for spending too much time with the patient. And we would always scratch our heads with that because that's where the healing work is.
Right. It's interesting because that's what most of us thought going into medicine that we would get to do. And it really is very little of that because it is such a time-pressured profession at this point of measuring and clicking boxes and making sure you do all the right things, that the right stuff really is actually taking time with your patient and caring. And just like in so many other professions, I mean, I think about teachers and how burned out teachers are, and how now that, we're teaching towards kids passing certain tests, and there's certain curriculum, that all the fun things that our teachers used to get to do to really get kids to engage and think in a different way, it's very cookbook, just like medicine is now too. And so it's not just medicine. There's so many other professions that are very similar.
In my profession, there's a big push for using evidence-based practice, which on one hand, yes, obviously we want to know that the things that we're doing have been studied and generally work. But I'm sure you find this in your profession as well, too, that there's so much of an art to it that you have to develop that intuition and that gut instinct. And that is not an evidence-based practice that can be measured by insurance. That is what pisses me off. I feel like since I'm angry today, we could totally go off about how terrible the insurance industry is. I'm honestly like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how it's going to get fixed. And it scares the shit out of me.
I agree. And I just gave a talk here last week, and in my opening statement was a quote that I had found, I think by Albert Einstein, that said something like, not everything that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts. And so we're so focused on counting anything we can, but most of that stuff doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter to the little old grandma who comes in who just needs somebody to talk to, right? And those are the important things that we've really started getting away from in healthcare, and it burns people out, right?
Right. It sounds like you've made, and I want to hear specifics about what you've done in your community, but I guess just kind of thinking more nationally as well. Do you see how there's going to be a shift? Do you have any hypotheses of what's going to happen?
I think we are early in this transformation, but it will come, and there's going to be a big wave coming of people realizing that this is what the upstream work is to the things that we measure, like patient experience and patient outcomes. If we are not taking care of our docs and our nurses and our frontline staff, then we don't show up with a full tank of gas. And if we can't show up to work with a full tank of gas, we're not doing our best work. And that translates into patient experience and patient outcomes and the things that we're currently measuring. And so the health systems really haven't started to think about that and spend enough time, money, and resources upstream to realize how much that will matter. And so I think at some point, there will be the Mayo Clinics of the world and the Stanfords of the world that do it, and then all of a sudden it will become uncomfortable for organizations to not do it. And then we'll get somewhere. But that's still probably 5 to 10 years out, I bet.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I spoke with a colleague today because she had posted something on Facebook about struggling to even sign up for her health care. And now that middle class white people are struggling to get their health care, I figured that's what's going to start the revolution. Because, of course, many underprivileged people have had problems with health care for a really long time. But now that the middle class can't afford it, now it's going to be a crisis, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, my
Mm-hmm.
God, my monthly premium is like $1,800 a month for
Oh, my
my
God.
family of five of us. Right. And so,
Mm-hmm.
like, that's ridiculous. And I'm lucky enough to have a pretty decent paying job. Right. And so I
Right.
still look at that and go, holy crap. Because that's not great health care. That's an
Right.
$8,000 deductible. I still have to pay the first $8,000 out
Jesus.
of my pocket. So somebody who's working minimum wage or working kind of a entry level job, how do they make it
Mm-hmm.
work? They don't.
I really don't know. We see a huge gap. I guess they call it the underinsured because we'll get folks who have a really high deductible. And so you're paying me out of pocket 100 and something dollars a session. And you're like, why do I even have health insurance? What's the point of this? And they come to us and say, I can't afford this. And the only other options really, because in a private practice, you have to make a living too. So the only
Right.
other options are they go to community mental health. And so there's this wide gap that is just, it's maddening. And I want to fucking fix it.
No, I know. Oh my God. Good luck,
Oh,
woman.
I know. Well, on the fixing end, I'd really love to hear some details about what you've done in your community and hopes that it can inspire other people to make changes in their own space.
Yeah. So our bounce back project that we started, it kind of has two different arms to it. And I'd alluded to the healthcare arm initially. And so that continues to percolate along for us. And we just got done putting on a healthcare conference for 350 healthcare providers here in the Minneapolis area. And so well received, really engaged. Like it is what people are hungry for.
Yeah.
I speak at a lot of different conferences, and a lot of times the worst time to speak is the last one of the day, right? Because we've all been at a conference, right? You're getting
Oh,
your
yeah.
stuff ready. You're like, I want to get out of here. I'm
Yep.
hungry. I want to get to the airport early, whatever that is, right? And so by the time the last speaker comes around, there's half the people there that were there at the beginning. And at this conference, there were like maybe 5 people out of 350 people that left.
Nice.
And so,
Wow.
and they were there to the end. So this
They
is,
were committed.
you know, it's speaking to people for something that they want. They're really starting to engage. And so that makes me happy. The other arm that I think is the most fun, interesting part of this is what we get to do with what I call real life, normal human beings. And that's our community work. And so we've really tried to embed this work in our entire community. Buffalo is about 15,000 people in the center of Minnesota. So we've engaged different professions. So I did, for example, some kind of intense deep dives into Brené's work with a group of people who were made up of social services, the business leaders in our community, healthcare providers in the community, and teachers and educators in the community. And so we dove deep into this to give this group of leaders in our community an idea of what this work is and how it could really help them in whatever profession they had. And so that was the start of it. And then it really kind of blossomed and it went into the school district like wildfire. And so we've since then trained many of our high school teachers have gone through the Daring Way program curriculum with me. So then they take that back and they take a little tidbit here and there and they incorporate it into their curriculum. It went into our alternative high school, which is really where it started in our community. And we had one teacher who was so intent on this work and really dug into it. And she incorporated it into her curriculum for the entire semester. And those kids read Daring Greatly. They did projects along the way. Their final project for the year was to write Brené a letter telling her what it meant to them to read this book and what they learned. And when the teacher sent these to me, she said, you know, can you get these to Brené? And sent me an email with all these in with everybody's name taken out. And I started reading these letters and I had to get up and close the door to my office because I was just weeping.
Weeping. That's the word that came to me too, I bet. Oh my gosh.
And it would be stories like, I didn't realize how much this book would affect me, and I don't think you probably wrote it for teenagers, but I'll tell you that the shame really spoke to me because my mom and I left my dad 2 years ago, and 2 weeks after we left, he committed suicide. And I've carried that shame with me the entire last 2 years. And my mom's now a meth addict, and I don't get to see her. So I have that shame in me. And what I've realized is that I've got a long ways to go, but maybe that stuff isn't mine to carry. And I'm like, holy crap, like this is a 17-year-old kid who has 60 years of life under their belt already and 60 years of pain. And wow, like to have that kind of insight when you're that age is amazing. And so you'd get story after story that look like that in these kids in our alternative high school. And so it really blossomed out of there. And there was a small group of 3 or 4 of these kids who went and presented to our high school principal and assistant principals what they talked about and did in this class. And that's where it started in our high school. And so that's how we started training our high school teachers and how they started incorporating into their curricula. And now the students in the high school, they have all kinds of different things that they do throughout the year. One of them coming up after the first of the year is called Rave Week, and that it stands for Respect and Value Everyone. And so that week is really focused on things like Make It Count Tuesday and Wellness Wednesday and all these different things that they have brought back and connected with Brené's work through Gifts of Imperfection or Daring Way or Rising Strong. And so even how this has played out in the school is one of our assistant principals last year at Rave Week. They had a full school lyceum, I think is what we used to call them anyway. I don't know what they call them now, but it was where everybody, all the kids in the school get together for half an hour. And he got up there on stage and talked about his 25-year battle with depression and what it's meant to him and how hard it's been. And so this is not just an assistant principal. This is the guy who 10 years ago took this team to win the state championship basketball game, right? And so he's like the big, cool coach in town. And he's getting up there talking about his own battle with depression and how it's okay to talk about this. And that's what we do around here is we talk about it and we make it okay, right? And so this kind of work has been really amazing, not only in healthcare. I mean, I think it's been amazing for us, but boy, I tell you what, I get so excited when I talk about the stuff that's going on in our schools and our community. And so we just earlier in the year, we had a community-wide book read as well here. The community read Gifts of Imperfection. And so we did a kickoff in our Performing Arts Center. And so I gave a talk that night on the 5 most common regrets of the dying. And we kicked off the book read, and we had 500 and some people at that first event. And then we ended up having about 1,200 people in our community engaged in the community book read with about 60 different small groups going on at the same time where people would get together with their neighbors and discuss the book. And finally, a couple months later, we had a final celebration and brought people back together, had another larger presentation and kind of ice cream social and made it a fun day for the community to get back together at our school. So lots of cool stuff.
Yeah. What I'm hearing is essentially kind of leading by example, is that it sounds like you've really gotten people at the top, the physicians, I think, being one tier of that and setting the example by sharing vulnerability and sharing about their mental health struggles and whatnot, and then the teachers and the principal. And I've been talking with a friend about how do we continue to promote a culture of abundance and building each other up rather than living from fear. And it always comes back to shame at the end of the day, always.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head, is that it's about people who can go out there and model it for others. And when you can get the principal and a doc to do it, and you can get males in the community to do it, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And one of the things with our final event after our book read was over with is I don't know what it's called, but we had people walk from the back of the auditorium all the way up to the front with a card in front of them. And so like one of my friends who's a county commissioner, she walked up there and she's like, Carla Heater, county commissioner is what the white card said in front of her. And then she flipped it over and it said, have always struggled with being enough. We recruited 20 of our leaders in our community that everybody would be like, oh yeah, I know him. He's the chief of police. And I know her. She's the county commissioner, to do that. And again, it was,
Yep.
how do we lead this stuff by showing people that we're all a little fucked up, right?
Right. That's what I always say. Everybody's fucked up.
Right, we're all a little fucked up, and some of us actually know it, right?
Right. Well, that's the other challenge. And that's something that I would really like to get in and study is denial. What separates the people who do the work from the people who, for whatever reason, have too much fear that gets in the way.
Right. This work all comes down to courage, right? It all comes down to courage to be vulnerable, to talk about what's underneath your mask. And sometimes it takes a lot of other people to show you the way before you're even going to stick your toe in the water.
Yeah. Well, I feel like this is a really good segue into the healer conversation because, as I'm listening to you talk about all of these things that you're doing, even though this isn't clinical work, what you're doing is healing your community. Do you consider yourself a healer?
I do. And I would say that I think if you ask many docs, they would probably say that they consider themselves a healer, right? But I consider that in a much different way. And so I don't do a whole lot of clinical work anymore. And so the way I heal people is actually most of my job is about taking care of people in healthcare so that they can do a better job of taking care of their patients, right? So healing the healer really is what I view my job as, is that how do you get people to realize taking care of themselves is so important so that they can take care of other people. And that's the one thing that most people forget and is really the hardest thing to do. It's really easy to take care of other people. It's really hard to take care of yourself and to put yourself first and not let the story go in your brain of, oh, well, I'm being lazy. I shouldn't do that because somebody else needs it worse than I do. Those societal norms and the things that we tell ourselves are really not true. But that's that tape that goes on in our head.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time talking about self-compassion with people because I feel like it's actually such a small piece of the daring way, but I found it more impactful than empathy for people who struggle with chronic shame, right? Because if your voice is the one that you hear most often, that's going to be what's most impactful. And one time when I was running a group and we were talking about it, somebody was like, the golden rule really shouldn't be do unto others as you would do unto yourself. It really should be do unto yourself as you would do unto others. And I was like, mic drop. You're so right. Because it's just so much easier to care for somebody else because they deserve it more than we do.
Gosh, I think I saw this when I was at a conference, maybe out in California at Stanford, but it was Kelly McGonigal actually that was talking about it. And I loved how she put together her idea around compassion in general and self-compassion. And she had said that compassion is really made up of 4 different components. So there's giving compassion, there's receiving compassion, there's compassion for others, and witnessing compassion. And how all of those come together to fill your compassion bucket. And so while many of us find self-compassion so hard, she said, well, why not look at the other parts of the compassion bucket and see how we can get better at those? And when we get a little bit better at those, maybe higher water floats all boats. And maybe it makes it easier for us to be more self-compassionate if we say, okay, I'm going to be more present today and witness compassion going on around me. Maybe that's a step I can take today. And then maybe next month I'm going to get better at receiving compassion. Because for the most part, we all suck at that too, right? It's easy to give compassion, but when somebody tries to give it to you, it's hard to receive, like even a compliment, right?
Yes.
So when we
what
get
I was thinking.
I know, like when we get a compliment, the other day I got a haircut and I come into work and somebody goes, oh, you got a haircut, it looks nice, so what's the reflex thing that comes out of my mouth is, well, they had a thing at Great Clips and it was $7.99, so I had to get a haircut. And, like you totally negate it. And so how do we even get better at just saying, you know what, thanks for noticing, I really appreciate that, and then buttoning our lips shut. So I found when she talked about that, that was really helpful to me because self-compassion really does seem really hard to me. And so I thought, maybe I can do the witnessing thing and be more present, and maybe I can get better at receiving. And then maybe that is kind of a step into getting better at self-compassion too. And so I found that to be helpful for me as a way just to not look at it and go, oh my God, where the hell do I even start?
Right. Well, and I want to piggyback on what you're talking about accepting compliments. And what I've found is that there's a fear of being perceived as full of yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that goes, again, kind of back to scarcity and judgment. And It's really funny. Like, that's one of the things I'm trying to do is just accept compliments and like really like take it in and let myself feel it. But it's funny. So my husband will say like, "Oh, you're the best wife ever." And I'll say, "I know." But then he like shoots back at me and is like, "Well, somebody's full of themselves today." But and he and I are obviously like joking about all of this stuff, but why is it bad to say, "I know I'm the best wife ever for you"? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. I am not completely full of myself and have this ego that's going to float away. I'm just letting myself be grateful that my husband is grateful for me.
Right. Another way to even frame that is when other people give us compliments and pay us respect and be empathetic and compassionate with us, and we negate that by saying, "Oh, no, you shouldn't. This is just my job," or "This is just the way it is," it doesn't make them feel good either, right? And so,
right, because you're smacking it away.
right. So if we want to reframe it, like if we're so bad at self-compassion that we can't keep it and take it, then let's just reframe it and say, well, who am I to take that away from them? They're giving me a compliment, and I know that makes them feel good. And so who am I to take that away from them?
Right.
And so maybe if we have to reframe it, at least initially as that, maybe that's the way we can do it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's often something that I tell people, because that was an experience I had with my husband too, where he one time said I looked nice and I was like, "Oh, bleh, whatever." He literally said, "It really hurts my feelings when you don't accept my compliments." And I was like, "Touche, friend. Okay, then."
Right. Damn it. How does what I say get turned around and used against me, right?
I know. I'm the one who's always right. God damn it. Oh, well, let's shift into the wounded healer question.
Yeah.
How does that term sit with you?
I think it's right on in many of the instances, especially in myself and so many of the people around me, is that as I look at going through my training and the things that were done to me to become a physician, there was a lot of wounding that went through that. And then there was a lot of bad habits that were taught. So I've spent the last 5 years of my life trying to unwind that and trying to take myself and realize that I am a wounded healer, and how do I work on that for myself and those around me.
Absolutely. And I guess I'm just thinking about young doctors who are in training right now. And if you had any advice for them, what would you say?
Well,
get out!
Like, how could I say that in a nice
way?
No, I'm just kidding.
Get out with your lies!
It's interesting because I was just having this conversation a couple days ago with a surgeon friend of mine, and we were talking about how training just needs to change. And then we reflected on when we were there and what we were thinking about. And in reality, when you're in medical school and your residency specialty program trying to learn things, the first and foremost thing in your mind is, oh my God, there's so much stuff to know. How can I know it all? I feel like I don't know anything. I'm such an idiot. Like, I need to be perfect. God, people must know that I'm an imposter, right?
Right.
And
back to shame.
Yeah, back to shame again. And so you spend your whole time trying to figure out the medicine aspect of what your hope is to just not kill anybody, right?
Right.
And so you're so focused on that, and there's so much to learn, that the whole idea of taking care of yourself and self-compassion is out the window. Yeah. And first of all, it's really not taught in medical school or residency or in healthcare a whole lot in training. And I think even if it was, I think the mindset that we are at that time, we're just not even open to it. I think back to my training, and I didn't have another physician who would model it for me. I know of no physicians that I trained with that could have modeled taking care of themselves and the importance of time to do that. And so who they brought in was, well, bring in the social worker, bring in the psychologist to tell us, right? And so...
And they never listen to us.
Right. Which the message was exactly what we wanted to hear, which we should have wanted to hear, but we weren't ready for it. And for some reason, at that point in my life, I would have needed somebody that had an MD behind it to tell it to me, right? Because I would have felt like, well, how could the psychologist or the social worker even know what I'm going through? Right? Yep. Which is total bullshit, but that's the mindset that they're in. And so it's just an interesting conundrum. And as I am working through my own wounded healer stuff and working with so many other wounded healers on this, I say, one of the first things for us to do to dig ourselves out of this is to be the person we needed for somebody else. So that person you needed 20 years ago, how can you be that for somebody else, right? Because that's how we make this different and change and be better.
And that's one of the reasons that I teach social work master's level students, because I want them, same thing that you said about medical resident students. There's this thing, you got to learn it all and you have to know everything. And I keep telling them, you're not going to know anything when you graduate, and that's normal.
Right.
And give yourself a break. Just know that the knowledge is being absorbed. As long as you're doing a fair effort to complete your assignments and read the books and do that sort of thing, you're doing everything you can. Give yourself a break internally and just trust that you're going to become the therapist that you want to be over time. And same with doctors. There's no substitute for clinical experience, and that just takes time.
Right. Absolutely. Right on.
Thank you. Well, and the other thing that I'm hearing that needs to happen before training can really change is a cultural shift where we shift the values that we're holding most highly. And right now it's success, I feel like, in this country.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's
money and power and success.
Right. And that's fucking everything up. That's not what makes us happy. That's what makes people kill themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm sure that you've heard this or read it, but gosh, I don't know where it came out. I read it peripherally the other day of how the life expectancy in the U.S. for the first time ever has gone down.
Oh, shit. Are you serious?
Because of elevated numbers of suicides and drug problems. So if we talk about opioids numbing everything and we talk about suicides, well, if you can't numb it, then that's the other option, right? And so the first time ever that the life expectancy went down in the United States was this year because of those two things.
And I mean, it's so obvious to you and me that that's such a wake-up call for a cultural shift, but kind of like you talked about earlier, it had to be personal for you in order for you to create that change. And I'm just like always racking my brain to figure out, how do we make this for everybody? Because we know we're all interconnected, and what hurts one person hurts the totality of us. But if you're blind to that and you're in denial and you're not connected with your body and all these things, you're not going to be open to it.
Well, it is so true. And unfortunately, I think the fact of the matter is that for it to have a lot of focus on and resources and things put into it, it's some high profile person who has to go through a lot of trauma and tragedy who can help to push to get things done. Until that happens to some senators or representatives or the president, somebody, it's just like school shootings, right? So like, how many frickin' more do we need? Like, and when do we actually do something about it? Well, it probably isn't until some big high profile people lose their kids. Like, and that's frickin' ridiculous.
Right.
But unfortunately, that kind of is the way it seems like it works, right?
Right.
God.
I know. Oh, well, I'm thinking we should try to end on a happy note. Instead of being like,
maybe,
school shooting, suicide. Okay, bye.
Well, have a great day, everybody.
Amazing. But I just hear so much hope from the work that you do. And I find it really difficult in a really big place like Chicago to make the big changes that I want to make. But when I step back and look at, I've created a couple different communities of people who are really loving and caring and supporting for each other. And I think that's the best way we can do it, right? Is to just try to lead by example, to try to walk the walk, and hope that the majority of people will follow at some point and walk their own walk.
Yeah, absolutely. If each one of us can save one other person's life, that's a pretty damn cool thing to do in your life, right? And that is probably not that hard to do, right? By living in our values and living consistent with our integrity and trying to just be the person we needed to have in our life 5 years ago or 20 years ago. And that makes a huge difference, right? And so that's the part that we need to remember all the time, is that we make a huge difference every day. And what we do, and when we're consistent in living in our own values and our own integrity and being who we are and throwing out an F-bomb here and there because that's who I am, that allows other people then to swear as much as me. And I think that's really fucking cool, you know?
Right.
And so that'll probably save somebody's life, I think.
I think so too. Cussing helps everyone. They do say that people who cuss tend to generally be smarter as well, so.
Right, and more trustworthy.
Right.
And there was something I just saw on Facebook not too long ago that said your best friend should be somebody who cusses a lot. And so I, of course, posted on mine and said, well, who wants to be friends with me?
Who wants to be my BFF? Right. That's amazing. Oh, my goodness. Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you want to make sure to share with listeners?
No, I think we talked about some really good stuff, and we were a little bit here and there, but boy, the consistent thread is be who you are and stand up for what
Yeah.
matters and take care of yourself. And when we all do that together, big things can happen, and we can actually change this world.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Corey, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. This was awesome.
Yay. Thank you so much for listening to my interview with Dr. Corey Martin. Wasn't that awesome? For more information about Corey, you can go to our website at www.headhearttherapy.com/podcast. Thanks as always to the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Come hang out with me on Instagram sometime, or Facebook, or I guess Twitter. I don't really do Twitter that much, so if you hang out there, I might not respond for a while, to be honest. But thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, bye-bye.